Okay, now we're going to look at Browning's monologue PROSPICE, which in some ways is the sort of darkest of the 10 poems, but actually has a very positive message perhaps towards the end. The title, again, use of Latin, but that would be very familiar to the Victorian reader. Prospice is a word coming from Latin for looking forward. So it's often used to describe like a sort of mystical force of fate, but more literally it's sort of looking ahead to one's future. And so it would have quite positive, optimistic connotations, which is perhaps challenged when you read the opening of the poem. So it begins with this really harsh, fricative rhetorical question, fear death, which actually becomes what's known as hyperphora or hypophora, I'm not really sure, where the rest of the poem is the answer to Browning's own rhetorical question. He makes the question very dramatically, a sort of defiant statement. Then we have a brief caesura, and he goes on to describe how unafraid he actually is. So he starts by using a semantic field of sort of weather, the elements, fog, mist, snows, blasts, these nouns creating this quite violent natural image to create a sense of the place. So this sort of deixis of place suggesting a physical confrontation. And that runs all the way through the poem, the need to kind of physicalize in order to understand and challenge death. If we look at the power of the night, the press of the storm, the post of the foe, you've got a quite powerful syntactic triplet there, sort of plosive nouns emphasizing each of the three phrases, building up to this anthropomorphism, he, the arch fear. So what makes this anthropomorphism rather than just personification is the kind of full forming of a character, particularly the proper nouns, and we all have that image of the Grim Reaper, cloak, scythe, that we use to understand the concept of death. So that then allows him to present the idea of dying as a battle and a fight. A battle's to fight, ere the guerdon be gained, the reward of it all. And there's an effort to create a persona of sort of strength and challenge, ever a fighter. Again, the use of the agent noun being very important. He's defining himself through his ability to fight, which is then stressed by the superlative language that follows. Particularly, Browning talks about not wanting to miss or fail to experience death. So again, the idea of it being something visible and tangible. He mentions eyes and creep, using the senses to make death seem so much physical, taste. And there is the kind of the grimmest line really of the whole poem is that he describes life using this list of three of pain, darkness and cold. So the three abstract nouns there are so dark and depressing, and they suggest that life itself is not really worth living. And that's where the context of the poem becomes very important, because what we need to understand is that it deals with Browning's grief and loss of his own wife. So this is written towards the end of his life, having lost Elizabeth and feeling real grief at her death, which kind of explains the attitude and the anger. But that anger becomes much more kind of resilient in the final lines of the poem. He builds up this really dramatic scene, elements rage, fiend voices that rave, shall dwindle, shall blend, shall change, shall become. That syntactic repetition of the modal verb, really building up the drama of his statement, O thou soul of my soul. And that reveals to us the silent listener that was perhaps aimed at all along, being his lost wife. I shall clasp thee again, and with God be the rest. So clasp is a quite harsh, but maybe quite intimate physical verb to choose, and it does imply the sort of romance and passion of the reunion he imagines, and with God be the rest. So essentially, the argument of the whole poem being that death cannot be feared because death is a way of being reunited with a lost loved one.